Among all the world's mainstream media outlets, there's a lot of competition for the position of most vital organ of the establishment. It actually seems a little unfair to give any one of them that dishonour, since so many of them work so hard to fulfil their duties. But it makes sense to start with one of the main contenders for head guard dog of the status quo, which has got to be The Economist. With a global circulation of 1.5 million, the glossy weekly magazine claims to be one of the most influential English-language publications in the world. Politicians, businessmen, diplomats and bureaucrats in every country from Norway to South Africa, Japan to America have it on their desks, supposedly benefiting from its wisdom to make decisions that shape lives and events everywhere. Mere mortals read it too, but the readership is slanted towards well-off, middle-aged men. 87% of its subscribers are men, and their average income is $175,000 US. 2/5 of subscribers are company directors or higher. Around 1/6 of them have a private plane or helicopter. Altogether, The Economist subscriber base has a net worth of more than $1.5 billion US, which, as the magazine's website boasts, is more than the combined GDP of Spain and Switzerland. If they were a country, it says, they would be the 8th richest in the world. It was founded in 1843 by the hat manufacturer James Wilson to promote the cause of free trade in Victorian England. The visual style and prose of the magazine retains something of this 19th century flavour. Its covers and cartoons often depict major world powers as stereotypical characters or animals. A bear for Russia, a dragon for China, an eagle or Uncle Sam for the US, etc. But they've also kept up with the times enough to make plentiful use of Photoshop-based jokes, mocking up a film poster for Obama's 2013 summit meeting with Chinese Premier Xi Jinping as Brokeback Mountain, or the cover from 2010 applauding the radicalism of David Cameron's Conservative government in the UK, or one from 2009 expressing excitement about the prospects of the Brazilian economy. The Economist title has always been something of a misnomer, though. Its main concerns are absolutely political. It often describes itself as belonging to the radical centre, supposedly combining support for sensible, middle-of-the-road policies, no extremes please, we're British, with a kind of daring, unconventional thinking that only the truly successful have. In reality, the main cause it has adopted over the years has been making sure that the exceptionally powerful and wealthy stay that way, and whatever unconventional thinking it does embrace involves nothing that might threaten their position. For much of its lifespan, the readership was restricted mainly to the UK. It's only really in the 1980s and 90s, the age of Reagan and Thatcher and the free market, Clinton and Blair and globalization, that it gained a worldwide audience. With the rightward political drift of the times, the magazine's positions have become ever more nakedly conservative, its rhetoric increasingly shrill. Given its long history and considerable range of coverage, it's hard to give any simple summary of its views over time, but for now, we can single out some of the main strands. One is an unrelenting commitment to the role of private capital. State bad, private good has been the mantra the magazine has stuck with over recent decades, calling for more and more privatization across the globe. Even this year, after 3 decades of relentless neoliberal market reforms, they were calling for more sell-offs. Putting more public assets into private hands is not just a question of efficiency or quality of services for The Economist, it's a deep existential principle. This is why they worship Margaret Thatcher, who laid waste to Britain's public services for more than a decade and threw tens of thousands of people into poverty and unemployment. When she died in April 2013, they hailed her as a freedom fighter. Whose freedom was she supposed to have been fighting for? Apparently everyone's. The magazine's editorial saluted her for advancing the right of individuals to run their own lives as free as possible from micromanagement by the state. Of course, what this really means is the right of private companies and individuals to make money and to keep as much of it as possible. Several years into a worldwide economic crisis unleashed by the financial sector's greedy ingenuity, the idea of maybe, perhaps, suggesting 1 or 2 slightly tighter regulations had the magazine reaching for World War II metaphors, with the City of London supposedly about to be destroyed. A second important part of The Economist's editorial stance is its fervent, some might say slavish, backing for US foreign policy. To some extent, this is perfectly consistent. The US is the world's richest and most powerful country, and if, like The Economist, you believe that wealth and power are a sign of intrinsic superiority, then why wouldn't you be a cheerleader for American capitalism, as the example everyone else should follow? But even more important than this is the US's role as guarantor of the liberal capitalist world system with its huge inequalities. For The Economist, American power is essential to maintaining what they call the rule of law and property rights across the globe. In other words, keeping the rich up and the poor down. This need to make the world safe for capitalism is why The Economist has eagerly supported all the wars and aggressions launched by the US and its allies in recent decades, from Vietnam onwards. In the weeks after the September the 11th attacks, it was beating the drum for war in Afghanistan, which it called heartrending but necessary. I'm sure everyone in Afghanistan was touched by their concern. Its moral steadfastness was also on display when it asked, early in 2003, is torture ever justified? The answer was, well, yes, maybe, depending on the situation, and I quote, "Given the gravity of the terrorist threat, vigorous questioning short of torture, prolonged interrogations, mild sleep deprivation, perhaps the use of truth serum, might be justified in some cases." And it wasn't about to let the side down over Iraq. In the run-up to war, it helpfully made the case for why an invasion would be justified. Surprisingly, for a magazine called The Economist, it doesn't seem ever to have been bothered by what the war might have cost, even in money terms, let alone the hundreds of thousands of human lives now lost in Iraq as a result of the decade-long occupation. More recently, it has been so keen to see Assad overthrown in Syria that it started announcing the end of the regime on a weekly basis from 2012. But it then realized that the disastrous civil war in that country was set to continue for some time. So it started calling for US military intervention in Syria. "Hit him hard," insisted one cover in August 2013 with a picture of Assad. When a new edition of Shock and Awe failed to land on Damascus, it went into a sulk, bemoaning the weakness of Western power by showing a defanged, limping lion looking quizzically at Syria. One area where The Economist's desire to back the US has come into conflict with its original liberal philosophy is the massive surveillance revealed by Edward Snowden. If ever there was a case of an overweening, domineering state interfering in the private affairs of citizens, this was it. But The Economist's anti-statism seemed to pause at the boundaries of the security apparatus. In mid-June 2013, they ummed and ahed about the massive NSA surveillance program, saying that spooks do need secrecy, but not on everything, always and everywhere. Our point is not that America's spies are doing the wrong things, but that the level of public scrutiny is inadequate. Indeed, if there is one part of the world that has caused The Economist particular concern in the last decade and a half, that is Latin America. The string of left and centre-left governments elected across the region since Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999 has been a real headache, offering proof that radical challenges to the liberal capitalist status quo are not only possible, but popular. So, The Economist has worked hard to help stop this idea taking root anywhere else. To do this, it has adopted two main strategies, one crude and propagandistic, the other a more subtle political ploy. On the one hand, it has sought to downgrade and discredit the achievements of the more left-wing governments in the region, attacking the political and economic record of Chavez, Morales, Correa and Kirchner, who it has variously portrayed as tyrants, inexperienced hotheads or ranting ideologues. Argentina's rejection of IMF interference and firm stance on debt has been the subject of much disapproval. In an especially misogynist moment in February 2012, The Economist cartoonist portrayed Cristina Fernandez as a witch cooking the inflation figures. But the main focus of The Economist's vitriol was, of course, Hugo Chavez. The magazine had always wished he would disappear and couldn't conceal its disappointment when the 2002 coup attempt failed. Chavismo's continued electoral success was an inconvenient fact that the magazine explained by referring to its anti-American rhetoric and good fortune in benefiting from high oil prices. The government's immense contribution to reducing poverty in Venezuela was dismissed as populist redistribution, irresponsibly sharing the proceeds of oil instead of letting the rich keep them. When the Comandante died in 2013, The Economist published a sickeningly triumphant piece attacking his rotten legacy. This included the criminal act of having encouraged the middle class to emigrate. You could almost hear the gleeful rubbing of hands when its editorial of 9th of March 2013 concluded that hard times lay ahead for the Latin American left. With luck, Chavismo will now have lost much of its sting, it wrote, adding that Chavez's death could help break the deadlock that has stalled Latin American integration. By that, of course, it means integration as a free trade area, the FTAA, rather than as a coherent political and economic bloc that might pose an obstacle to Washington's will. But The Economist's coverage of Latin America has not been entirely negative. It has had positive examples to point to as well. In the same breath as it was attacking Chavez, it held up its preferred option, Brazil's Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, whose rise to the presidency from a poor northeastern background, it said, entitled him to assume the moral leadership of a new, democratic Latin American left, one that seemed to have freed itself from the past attachment to an all-powerful state. More important still, he stuck to responsible macroeconomic policies put in place by his predecessor, Fernando Henrique Cardoso. but then also made considerably more effort to reduce poverty through the Bolsa Familia and a range of other measures. A bit of redistribution in other words, but not so much as to get on the nerves of the business elite. The other government in the region that The Economist liked was in Chile, where Lagos and Bachelet offered another example of pragmatism. A few drops of social concern for the poor here, an ocean of private wealth there, and everyone supposedly a winner. This is the second prong of its strategy, to drive a wedge between what it describes as sensible, realistic left governments and the irresponsible, dangerous, radical ones. Its editorials have identified a battle for Latin America's soul, pitting populists against Democrats. In this fantasy, the elected governments of Ecuador, Venezuela, Bolivia, and Argentina for some reason don't count as Democrats. And when they speak of Latin America's soul, what they really mean is the elite's right to carry on making money at everyone else's expense. Of course, since Latin America is still the world's most unequal region in terms of income, even The Economist admits that a bit of redistribution might be a good idea. The key thing, though, is not to get carried away into irresponsible ideas like nationalization or even, heaven forbid, socialism. It complained that this had become fashionable in much of the region, as if it were a lifestyle choice or a pair of genes, rather than an entire political, social, and economic philosophy. We've looked at just a small sample of The Economist's views here, trying to pick out the fundamental logic behind them. All in all, the basic premises are pretty simple. Defend the rights of the powerful and wealthy against any challenge from below. This brings us back to the issue we started with The Economist's supposedly global reach and influence. Because although it might seem to some that the magazine plays a role in shaping elite opinion everywhere, it might make more sense to think of it the other way around. Every week, it serves up the ideas that allow the global elite to defend their positions and their fortunes. In other words, it reassuringly reflects the opinions of the rich and powerful back at them, boldly telling them, once again, what they already know.